Ethan had never thought that something so small could make his entire world stop. The item in his pocket was almost meaningless in value. Cheap, insignificant, something that would barely be noticed, missing from a shelf. And yet, as he pushed open the glass doors of the store and felt the evening air brush against his face, a sudden voice, firm and unyielding, made his heart slam against his ribs. "Excuse me, sir. Stop right there." The sound was low, commanding, leaving no room for doubt. Ethan froze in place, his mind spinning. His body turned on instinct, slow, reluctant, like a guilty child caught red-handed. Standing behind him was the store's security guard, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark uniform that seemed to amplify his authority. Alex's gaze was locked on him. Sharp, steady, unreadable. Ethan tried to swallow, but his throat was dry. He wanted to say something, anything, that might undo what had just happened. But Alex's eyes told him there would be no escape. The guard lifted his hand slightly, a gesture that looked calm but carried weight, like an order Ethan dared not ignore. "Come with me," Alex said, his voice low but cutting through the noise of the mall around them. Ethan's heart dropped. His pulse pounded so loudly he was sure the people passing by could hear it. He glanced around quickly. A few shoppers had already turned their heads, curious. He caught the flicker of recognition in their eyes. They knew he was in trouble. Shame burned his skin hotter than fire. He lowered his gaze and nodded. Alex stepped closer, not aggressively, but with a presence that pressed against Ethan like an invisible wall. The guard didn't need to grab his arm. His authority alone was enough to pull Ethan along. They walked together through the store, past racks of untouched merchandise, past the exit that had almost been his escape. Ethan's legs felt heavy, every step echoing his failure. They reached a door marked staff only. Alex swiped a card, and the lock clicked open with a sound that made Ethan flinch. It felt final, like a judge's gavel. The door opened to a narrow hallway, lit by a harsh fluorescent glow that seemed colder than daylight. Inside, Alex instructed, his tone neutral, professional, but firm enough to leave no doubt that this was not a request. Ethan obeyed. He entered the corridor, hearing the door close behind them with a thud that cut off the noise of the mall. Silence pressed in, broken only by the sound of their footsteps as Alex led him deeper inside. The hallway turned once, then opened into a small, stark room. It was nothing like the bustling, colorful store outside. The walls were plain, off-white, stripped of decoration. A single table and 2 chairs sat in the center, their metal frames dull under the bright light. In a corner, high on the wall, a black security camera pointed down at the space. The air felt heavy, still almost clinical. Alex stopped at the doorway and motioned to the chair opposite the table. "Sit." Ethan hesitated, his knees almost buckling from the rush of panic. He sat down quickly, clasping his hands together to hide their trembling. His pulse hammered in his ears, his thoughts a storm of fear. Would Alex call the police? Would his parents find out? His professors? His friends? The humiliation of all was worse than the thought of punishment. Alex closed the door, the sharp snap of the lock echoing in the small room. Then he leaned against the table, folding his arms across his chest, watching Ethan with calm intensity. He hadn't raised his voice once, hadn't touched him, but the quiet authority he carried filled every inch of the room. Ethan felt pinned in place like a moth caught under glass. The seconds stretched unbearably. The silence was louder than shouting, heavier than any lecture. Ethan dared to look up, but Alex's eyes caught his immediately. They weren't furious, but they were relentless. Eyes that had seen lies before, that could read guilt like an open book. Ethan swallowed hard, unable to break the stare. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. This wasn't just about a cheap item slipped into his pocket. It was about being seen completely with nowhere to hide. He shifted in his seat, the chair squeaking against the floor. The sound was small, but in the silence it felt deafening. Alex's expression didn't change, but the air between them tightened further, thick with unspoken questions. Ethan wanted to explain himself, to speak first, but the words caught in his throat. His excuses sounded hollow, even in his own mind. He lowered his gaze to the table, trying to steady his breath, knowing that whatever came next was no longer in his hands. For the first time in his life, Ethan realized what it felt like to have no control over the next second, the next minute, the next hour. All he could do was wait for Alex to decide his fate. Under the harsh fluorescent light, the room seemed even smaller than before, and Ethan felt the pressure of every second that ticked by. His palms were damp against the surface of the metal table, his heartbeat refusing to slow. He expected Alex to reach for a phone, to call the police and bring this humiliation to its inevitable conclusion. But the guard did nothing of the sort. He leaned forward slightly, arms still folded, eyes steady, his voice calm, but edged with authority when he finally spoke. "I'm not calling anyone. Not yet. First, you're going to tell me why you thought this was worth it." Ethan's stomach twisted. The question was simple, but the weight behind it crushed him. He could have lied. He could have pretended it was a mistake. But Alex's gaze made him feel stripped bare. There was no space for excuses here. I don't know," he stammered, his voice breaking as he tried to hold it steady. "It just happened." Alex didn't move, didn't blink, his silence more unnerving than any accusation. "That's not an answer," he said after a moment, his tone low and controlled. "People don't risk everything for nothing. What's the real reason?" The words pressed down on Ethan's chest. He wanted to stay quiet, but Alex's presence filled the room like a force he couldn't resist. He glanced up and instantly regretted it. The guard's eyes were sharp, unyielding, almost daring him to lie. Ethan looked away again, his throat dry. "I don't know if you'd understand," he whispered. "Try me." Alex's reply was immediate, firm, like a command. The silence stretched again, thicker this time. Ethan could feel the air tightening around him. He shifted in his chair, wishing he could disappear. The truth clawed at him, but saying it aloud felt dangerous, like stepping into a void. Still, Alex's patience, or maybe his lack of it, pushed him closer. "I didn't have money," Ethan admitted at last, voice cracking. "I was hungry. It was stupid." Alex leaned in slightly, resting his arms on the table, his expression unreadable. "That's still not enough," he said. "People ask for help when they're hungry. They don't sneak something into their pocket and hope no one notices. You're hiding more than that." Ethan felt heat rush to his face, a mix of shame and frustration. "Why do you care?" he shot back before he could stop himself. The words came out harsher than he intended, but they filled the space between them like a spark catching fire. For the first time, Alex's expression shifted. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in sharp focus. He uncrossed his arms and leaned closer, the edge of his presence pressing down on Ethan even harder. "Because," Alex said slowly, "I've seen dozens of thieves. Real thieves. People who steal for sport, for profit, for the thrill of it. You're not one of them. You don't even know how to lie properly. You're here for another reason. And until you tell me the truth, I'm not letting this go." Ethan's chest tightened. His pulse thundered. He tried to open his mouth, but no sound came out. His secret sat at the edge of his lips, heavy, impossible. He felt Alex watching him, measuring every hesitation, every twitch of his fingers. "Who are you hiding from?" Alex asked suddenly. His tone was sharp, cutting straight into the core of him. Ethan flinched. The words hit too close. "I'm not," he started, but his voice cracked, betraying him. "Yes, you are," Alex interrupted, his voice calm but unrelenting. "You're hiding something. From me, from yourself, maybe from everyone else out there." He nodded toward the door, toward the world beyond it. "And you thought stealing a piece of nothing would distract you from it, even for a second. Am I wrong?" The room seemed to spin around Ethan. His hands shook where they rested on the table. He wanted to deny it, but Alex had pierced through the wall he had built so carefully. His breath came shallow, quick, and for a moment he hated how easily the guard could read him. "You don't get it," Ethan whispered, his eyes locked on the table, his voice barely audible. "Then make me understand," Alex pressed. His tone wasn't cruel, but it was steady, deliberate, and it left no escape. The seconds stretched until Ethan couldn't hold them anymore. He lifted his eyes, finally meeting Alex's stare, and for the first time he saw something other than authority there. Curiosity, maybe even concern, but still wrapped in an intensity that pinned him in place. The tension filled every corner of the room. Ethan felt his chest ache from holding back words that demanded to be spoken. He was cornered, not by walls, not by locks, but by a single man who refused to let him hide. And in that moment, Ethan realized this wasn't about the store or the item he had taken. It wasn't even about punishment. It was about the truth he had spent years burying, and the stranger who, for reasons Ethan couldn't explain, wasn't willing to look away until he uncovered it. The silence that followed was unbearable, yet Alex didn't move, didn't break eye contact. He simply waited, steady and unyielding, while Ethan sat on the edge of a confession that terrified him more than anything else in his life. The silence stretched unbearably, as though the room itself was holding its breath. Ethan could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent light above, the distant echo of footsteps in the hallway outside, but in here, the world had narrowed to just him and Alex. The guard's eyes remained fixed on him, steady, probing, unrelenting. There was no anger in them, no cruelty, but there was something even harder to face: expectation. Alex wasn't going to let this go. He wanted the truth, and Ethan realized with a jolt of dread that he could no longer keep it hidden. His throat tightened as if invisible hands were pressing against it. He wanted to speak, but the words felt jagged and dangerous, sharp enough to cut him as they left his mouth. He shifted in the chair, hands twisting together in his lap, his nails biting into his palms. Fear rose in his chest like water flooding a sinking ship, and still Alex waited, his silence more powerful than any threat. Ethan drew in a shaky breath. "It's not about the food," he whispered, his voice raw, almost breaking under its own weight. Alex tilted his head slightly, acknowledging the first crack in the wall Ethan had built. "Go on," he urged, not harshly, but firmly enough to leave no space for retreat. Ethan's eyes dropped to the table, staring at the scratches in the metal surface as if they might provide an escape route. His pulse hammered against his ribs, loud and insistent. He thought of the world outside, of the faces he saw every day, the careless laughter of classmates who never suspected, the cold silence of his father at the dinner table when conversations grew too personal. He thought of every time he had bitten his tongue, forced a smile, swallowed the truth until it burned in his chest like acid. When he finally spoke, it was as though the words were dragged out of him against his will. "I'm tired of hiding," he admitted, his voice trembling. "It's not about being poor or hungry or desperate. It's about me, about who I am." He stopped, breathless, his confession hanging in the air, unfinished. Alex leaned forward slightly, his expression unchanged, but the intensity of his focus made Ethan feel as though he was standing under a spotlight with nowhere to run. "Who are you, Ethan?" Alex asked quietly, but the question was like a strike against the last defense Ethan had left. The words burst out of him, torn from the core of his fear. "I'm gay," he said, almost choking on the syllables. "I've been hiding it, pretending, lying to everyone, including myself. And I hate it. I hate how afraid I'm all the time. Afraid of my family, of my friends, of people like you looking at me differently." His voice cracked, his chest heaving as though he had just run a mile. For a long moment, the only sound was his uneven breathing. He dared not look up, terrified of what he might see in Alex's face. Judgment, disgust, the same look he had caught once on his father's face, sharp and cold enough to slice through him like glass. The memory seared his mind, and the shame of it made his skin burn. "I didn't steal because I wanted chocolate," Ethan continued, his voice barely more than a whisper now. "I stole because I wanted to feel something, anything. Just for a moment, I wanted to believe I wasn't trapped in this secret. I thought if I did something reckless, if I got caught, maybe I'd finally be forced to stop lying. But it doesn't make sense, does it?" His laugh was hollow, brittle, the kind that breaks before it even leaves the throat. Alex did not interrupt. He didn't shift in his chair, didn't glance away. He simply watched, and Ethan felt the weight of that gaze as if it pinned him to the chair more effectively than any chains could. He finally risked a glance upward, bracing himself for the expression he feared most. But Alex's face was unreadable, Calm, almost thoughtful, his eyes steady but without the flicker of disdain Ethan had braced himself against. That absence of rejection was almost worse. It left Ethan suspended in a painful uncertainty. The tension thickened until every second stretched unbearably long. Ethan could feel his own body trembling, the raw vulnerability of his confession leaving him exposed, unprotected. He had finally spoken the words he had kept buried for years, and now everything hinged on the reaction of the man sitting across from him. The silence in the room was no longer empty. It was charged, heavy with unspoken consequences. Ethan's chest ached as he waited, terrified that at any moment Alex's expression might harden, his voice might turn cold, and everything he feared would crash down around him. He braced himself for rejection, for ridicule, for the final confirmation that the world was as merciless as he had always believed. And yet Alex said nothing. He only watched, his silence forcing Ethan to confront the unbearable weight of his own truth. In that moment, Ethan realized that sometimes the scariest part of confessing isn't the words themselves. It's the waiting, the endless anticipation of what those words will unleash. The weight of Ethan's confession still hung in the air, raw and heavy, like smoke that refused to clear. He sat frozen in his chair, chest rising and falling with unsteady breaths, his palms pressed flat against the cold metal table, as if anchoring himself against the fear that at any second, Alex would speak the words he dreaded most. The seconds dragged on mercilessly. Ethan could feel his throat tighten, every muscle in his body waiting for the blow, for the inevitable rejection that would confirm everything he had always believed, that telling the truth only ended in loss. But Alex didn't look away. He didn't shift uncomfortably, didn't lean back in disgust. Instead, he remained utterly still, his gaze fixed on Ethan with the same piercing intensity as before. Yet something was different. There was no hardness in his eyes now, no judgment. There was something else Ethan couldn't place, something quieter, heavier, and far more dangerous, something that made his pulse race not with fear, but with a strange and confusing anticipation. Finally, Alex broke the silence. His voice was steady, but softer than before, stripped of the sharp authority that had filled the room earlier. "You think I don't understand?" he said slowly. "But I do, more than you realize." Ethan blinked, his breath catching. The words didn't make sense. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Alex leaned forward slightly, his forearms resting on the table, the posture less like an interrogator now and more like a confidant. "Do you really think I asked you all those questions just to trap you? To corner you until you broke?" His tone carried no accusation, only a strange sincerity that unsettled Ethan even more. "I was trying to see if you would let me in. If you'd give me a piece of the truth I already suspected." Ethan's heart stumbled. "You suspected?" he repeated, the words shaky, uncertain. Alex nodded, his expression unwavering. "From the moment I stopped you, I knew this wasn't about theft. I've seen real criminals. Ethan, you don't carry yourself like them. You carry yourself like someone who's been carrying a secret too heavy for too long." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as though measuring the risk of what he was about to say. "And the truth is, I've felt that weight too." The words hit Ethan like a strike of lightning. His breath faltered, confusion flooding his mind. He stared at Alex, searching his face for some hint of irony, some cruel joke. But there was none. Only calm, unflinching honesty. Alex exhaled slowly, his gaze steady but no longer guarded. "I've kept parts of myself locked away for years," he admitted. "On this job, in my life, everywhere. Pretending, hiding, waiting for the right moment that never comes. You think you're the only one afraid of being seen, but you're not." He hesitated, then added, his voice lower. "That's why I noticed you. That's why I pushed. Because I recognized something in you that I've been fighting in myself." Ethan's world tilted. His fear was still there, but it was shifting, changing into something else. His chest tightened, not with dread this time, but with the dizzying possibility that he wasn't alone after all. Alex leaned closer, his voice almost a whisper now. "The truth is, I felt drawn to you since the moment I saw you. And asking those questions wasn't just about your theft. It was about seeing if you might feel the same connection. I couldn't say it outright. I couldn't risk it, but I needed to know. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The room seemed to shrink around him, the sterile walls and humming light fading into the background. All he could see was Alex, his steady eyes, his calm presence, the truth unraveling in every word. Shock rippled through him, stronger than any fear. He had braced himself for condemnation, for rejection, but never for this. He felt his voice tremble when he finally spoke. You mean you? He couldn't finish the sentence, his disbelief too great. Alex gave a single, deliberate nod. Yes, I've kept it hidden for a long time, but I can't deny it. Not now. Not to you. His eyes held Ethan's with an intensity that sent shivers through him. You're not alone, Ethan. Not anymore. The words struck deeper than any punishment could have. For the first time in years, the crushing fear that had defined Ethan's every step loosened its grip. He was still trembling, still overwhelmed, but something new began to take root in its place. A fragile, terrifying hope. He had walked into this room expecting chains, police, humiliation. Instead, he had found a confession that mirrored his own, an admission that shattered the loneliness he had thought would never end. The silence that followed was different now. It wasn't empty. It wasn't heavy with dread. It was charged, alive, trembling with the unspoken possibility of what might come next. For the first time in a very long time, Ethan didn't feel trapped. He felt seen, and the weight of that realization was almost too much to bear. The room felt different now, though nothing in it had changed. The same fluorescent light buzzed above. The same plain walls surrounded them. The same cold metal table stood between them. And yet, for Ethan, everything was new. The confession he had dreaded giving had left him bare and vulnerable. But Alex's unexpected truth had turned that vulnerability into something else. Something alive, fragile, but filled with possibility. He could hardly breathe, not from fear this time, but from the dizzying thought that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he had always believed. Alex straightened slowly, no longer leaning forward with the relentless authority of an interrogator. He pushed the chair back, its legs scraping softly against the floor, and his voice, when it came, carried none of the sharp edge it had held before. It was steadier, warmer, though still commanding in its own way. You're free to go, Ethan, he said, each word deliberate, carrying a weight that stretched far beyond the walls of this room. I'm not calling anyone. I'm not punishing you for what happened out there. That part is over. Ethan blinked, stunned, his body frozen with disbelief. After everything, the shame, the fear, the crushing silence, just like that, it was finished? His chest tightened, as though his heart didn't trust what his ears had heard. You're letting me go? He asked, his voice trembling. Yes. Alex's reply came without hesitation. But then his gaze softened, and he added words that lodged themselves deep inside Ethan's heart. Don't be afraid of who you are. Don't hide it. Don't bury it. You are worth more than the fear that's been choking you. You are worth love. The words cut through Ethan like light, breaking into a darkened room. For years, he had carried the unspoken belief that he was undeserving, that to reveal himself would mean rejection, isolation, loss. And now, in the most unlikely place, at the hands of someone he had expected to condemn him, he heard the opposite. You are worth love. The phrase rang in his mind with a force that nearly brought him tears. He rose slowly from the chair, his legs unsteady beneath him. Alex's presence was still overwhelming, still larger than life, but no longer frightening. Instead, it was steady and grounding. Ethan looked at the guard, really looked, and for the first time, he felt something shift inside himself. A door opening, a weight lifting, a future, hazy but real, beginning to take shape. Alex moved to the door and unlocked it, the click echoing like a signal of release. He held the door open, waiting, his eyes steady on Ethan's. It wasn't the gaze of a man passing judgment or issuing orders anymore. It was the gaze of someone who had seen him, all of him, and hadn't looked away. Ethan stepped past him, the hallway ahead stretching long and empty, but not as intimidating as before. With each step, he felt lighter, as if invisible chains had fallen away. The world outside the staff rooms, the mall with its crowds, its noise, its careless glances, was waiting. But this time, he wouldn't be walking back into it with the same weight on his shoulders. He carried Alex's words with him like a shield, like a promise. At the end of the hallway, just before he reached the exit back into the mall, Ethan turned. Alex was still by the door, watching him with that same unwavering calm. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world held still. No words passed between them, but none were needed. Something unspoken, something powerful, had already been exchanged in that room. It would not vanish simply because Ethan walked away. He pushed open the final door, stepping back into the light and noise of the mall. People bustled past him, unaware of the storm that had raged and settled within him only moments ago. To them, he was just another face in the crowd. But to himself, for the first time, he felt like more than that. He felt like someone beginning, not ending, someone ready to breathe without shame, to step forward without constantly glancing over his shoulder. The mistake that had brought him here now felt like the smallest detail of a much larger story. He had gone into that room believing it would end in humiliation, maybe even ruin. Instead, he left with something he had never dared to hope for: acceptance, understanding, and the faint but undeniable spark of hope that life could be different. As he walked into the crowd, Ethan's chest no longer felt crushed by fear. For the first time in years, he felt free. And though the path ahead was uncertain, one truth had already taken root in his heart. His life wasn't ending here in shame. It was beginning in honesty, in the echo of Alex's voice, in the certainty that he was worthy of love.